What's up, everyone? It's your host, Brittany Baker, and you're tuning in to Tech Me As I Am, the podcast bringing self-love to corporate America. And the only thing that we care about is you being true to your authentic self. So let's be real, let's be different, and let's get courageous, y'all. Always vibing out to that song. I don't know. It's a pretty dope beat, and I'm glad it was free. All right, y'all. So today, what I really want to talk about with everybody is a couple of different things. I have been on what we like to call a leave of absence. I've been telling people, and I finally came out of my shell and was like, hey, I had to take time for myself. I had to take time to grow me. I had to take time to sit in solitude because I was dealing with life, and life be lifing sometimes, right? Um, you know, we think about, having babies, or, we think about bereavement leave. We think about health issues in terms of like physically not being fit, and mental health is something that we don't oftentimes really give um reprieve for, or as much forgiveness for. And I think that ultimately, yes, there are a lot of complexities when it comes to mental health. And there are some people that really, really, really struggle with certain things. But there is mental health in terms of anxiety and you still being physically, mentally, and physically fit to be able to still do your job. But damn, burnout is real. And so, like, I just kind of want to talk a little bit about, some of the things that I've been going through. I recently released a post on LinkedIn, and shout out to my LinkedIn family and the people that I have as part of the Tech Me As I Am community that I'm working on building, and really being able to show up as ourselves. And, I'm right now going through the process of a divorce. It's actually been a process that I've been dealing with for quite a bit of time. I was carrying this weight, though, working a full-time job, being a mom full-time for over a year. And, the constant anxiety and things that I was dealing with on an everyday basis really, really, really was draining me, to the point that like I feel like a lot of my mental real estate was being taken up. And I just sit back and I think about the things that, we don't talk about when we have to go to work. I mean, you could be in a relationship and not even be married, and someone take up a significant amount of mental real estate in your mind. And then you still have to show up and perform because you're there to be paid for a job. And granted, yes, you're getting compensated from a monetary standpoint for showing up and doing these things, but you're still a person at the end of the day. And the only reason most times we're showing up in these jobs is because we're trying to provide for ourselves, our family, and really be able to do ultimately what we want to do in the long run. No one truly wants to work for someone else. I feel like if they're not happy, if you don't believe in what it is that you're doing, if you don't believe in the product, the services, you don't feel like you can be yourself. And so it took a lot for me to be able to come forward and think about like what I wanted to say and what I wanted to admit, because I mean, being a woman and being married, like we got to change our last names. We got to do a lot of stuff when it comes to, being tied to somebody. And so it's like, damn, do I want to go back to my previous name? Is that going to make it where people don't know? People are going to ask questions. And honestly, got to a point, I don't give a shit. Life happens. And guess what? That is okay. Life happens. You have to start over. You have to find yourself. You have to start new chapters. And so I really wanted to kind of talk about like what that journey has been like for me, and in taking the leave that I needed to take for myself. And then also thinking about like, okay, how am I going to plug back into work? Like, are we talking about these things when people take a leave? It took me 3 weeks in my time of leave to finally disconnect, because I was still checking emails for at least almost a month. And that was even during the holidays. Even when I was on vacations, even though I have such a great, LinkedIn family, and so many supporters and people that really care about me at work, that are like, hey, Britt, don't check emails, like disconnect. I'm like, yeah. I'm going to disconnect. And I was partially, but I really wasn't, because I was still tapping in. And because I felt like I needed to continuously go. And I had to sit down with myself and understand and unpack that. Like, why am I sitting back feeling like I need to have this constant need for speed. And this is what the title of the episode is the need for speed and the power of pause. The need for speed comes from the fact that I have to constantly be this person that is in survival mode, because the way that I was raised, being an 18-year-old mom and trying to figure out how to provide for this baby and myself being a baby, what did I need to do to survive and beat the odds of not being the Black teen statistic mom? Like, I didn't want to stay on food stamps. I didn't want to stay on cash aid benefits. I didn't want to stay in low income housing. I wanted to make sure that I made a name for myself, because I was like, I don't want this to be the trap, because it is so easy to do that. And, one of the first things that I did was go to school, and education was my outlet. I was actually the first person in my family to try to figure out, like, what do I need to do? And so as I go back into like all these different things and how I had to sit with myself and go back in time, which oftentimes you have to go back in time in order to be able to understand why you're showing up in the way you're showing up in that moment and in that time. And if you're not being reflective and constantly auditing your emotions and constantly thinking about, why am I showing up the way that I'm showing up? And you don't, take the time to go back, or you're too afraid to go back because the traumas are so significant, that is your indicator. Let that be your litmus test into being able to understand what way you're showing up, what way you're trying to get a barometer check, check 1 2 1 2. Do that all the time. How often are you auditing your emotions? Are you just going through them? How often are you reflecting? I literally it's actually funny, in this new journey that I have and have been going through, um I have kind of been like going into the waters of like testing out the dating scene, because mind you, it's been since I was 22 years old being in the dating scene. And someone in this journey of me like relearning myself told me not to, like, oh, here you go, going back to like self-reflecting. Oh yeah, I know what that means. And I'm like, first off, you don't know me. Second of all, like, that energy, that is an energy I didn't need. And it really helped me understand, like, this work that I have been doing for myself, that I do need to reflect. That was my reminder. That person was my reminder of how often I do need to reflect and not go into old ways and old habits. Because as we go through life, we go through lots of changes. And so I say all of that to say, like, if you recognize you're in survival mode, if you recognize you're dealing with a lot of anxiety, if you're recognizing certain things, avoidance, disassociation, all of these different facets of like how you might be showing up, you know, those things that you're doing in your personal life are also going to show up in your work life. You still have relationships at work. You still have uh cross collaborating you have to do. You still have leadership you have to communicate with. You still have coworkers that you bounce things off, one-on-ones, meetings, all of those things. Do you think you don't show up the same way that you do in your personal life at work? You are the same person. Oftentimes businesses do like to make us think that we can just shut this off and just type away and get the thing done, and then act like, excuse me, and act like, you know, you're not a person. And I think our minds kind of go there. We kind of start acting like we're not people. We start acting like we are here for a purpose. I'm going to cut everybody else off around me. I'm only here to collect that check and get out. But you spend 8 hours of your day here, 8 hours of your day somewhere, 5 days out the week or more. If you're doing overtime or working weekends or a hard worker or always trying to prove yourself or try to see, how can I see and show my employer that, I'm the best of the best, that I deserve to be here. And oftentimes we will associate our worth and our value to our jobs. I have been definitely guilty of that. And still am still trying to fight through understanding that my identity is not my job. It took a lot of courage for me to even create this podcast and talk about differentiating myself and my story and my journey. But I feel like this is something that a lot of people deal with behind the scenes, but we have to keep this front on because we don't want to subject ourselves to feeling like we can't, we're not employable. I have to have faith in myself to know that the work that I've been doing within myself is going to always allow me to show up in my job as my best self. And being able to know when I'm being gaslit, to always know when I'm being ignored or being dismissed, and being able to call out those emotions when I'm in those situations. Because I'll tell you right now, if a lot of us have traumas and have been dealing with traumas and they have not been tended to because most of us have not been giving the tools and resources that social media has allowed us to have in terms of understanding what mental health is and understanding how to love ourselves better, who do you think these people are or have been dealing with that have been running these companies for so long that haven't been putting the work in and have been also teaching people how to show up at work? Also teaching people how to gaslight you. If they're gaslighting people at home, do you think they're gaslighting people at work? And then excusing it off to be like, well, that's just business. And then you sit back and you think, am I crazy? It's just business though, right? So I don't know. I just want to implore people, as this is like, my first solo podcast, if you will, to just to kind of use as my own diary, my own perspective, my own learnings, the things that I'm teaching myself, pouring into myself. I just want to give people an opportunity to feel like they are seen. I want to give people an opportunity to know that there is such thing as having courage for yourself and vulnerability for yourself. And it is okay to do that. And it is a disservice for you if you can't do that for yourself. Because let me tell you, when I started really understanding myself and how I showed up and can recalibrate myself and my emotions and audit them, I showed up not just in my personal lives better, I showed up in my work life better. And everybody that I come in contact with, I always make sure that I have the experiences that I want to constantly have. When you sit back and you start agreeing, making these agreements with yourself and the energy, one thing, this book that I absolutely love, The Four Agreements, it specifically says being impeccable with your word. And I can honestly say, and being impeccable with your word, for those who have not read the book, is basically saying being able to use your word and your voice, when they say your word and your bond is your bond, having it without sin. Impeccable means without sin. So like if I am going into a room and I'm saying something, I always try to come from a good place, because the energy you put out there is the energy you also are going to get in return. And I am being extremely intentional about the energy that I put out there in every situation, in every regard, in every interaction, because I care about how I want to be treated, and I care about how I want to show up, and I care about that girl that's been in survival mode for so long. And the only way that you're going to be able to get out of that survival mode, and the only way that you're going to be able to get out of this mindset of constantly being on autopilot, is taking pause. And that doesn't necessarily mean you need to take a leave of absence from your job. For me, it was that severe to the point that I was shutting down and I was recognizing that. But the work that I was putting in for myself was the only reason why I recognized that I needed to do that, because I needed to reground myself and understand what stillness was for me. And in that stillness, I have been able to feed myself the things that I needed to feed myself. That was listening to certain books on Audible, podcasts, that was listening and taking in certain music. Like everything that I was consuming was intentional. I was consuming playlists I curated for myself when I'm feeling a certain type of way and needed to pour into myself, going through this set of emotions that I'm going through the things that the challenges that I'm dealing with as a mother, going into this new life. If I'm going through something, I need to know what resources I'm setting up for myself, that when I need that help, I can be the help for myself that I need. And if you don't have that infrastructure set up, use this episode to be that calling for you to set that infrastructure up. Be intentional. Hey, you know what? I know I'm dealing with a breakup. What can I give myself to help me understand that I was pouring into someone who was a vessel that didn't have room for me? Londrell, my artist that I listen to all the time, shout out Londrell. I have a curated playlist about that. And I literally would just sit in thought and understand whatever relationships I have are going to be intentional. And if I am not receiving, or I'm pouring into people that don't have room for me, understand that that has nothing to do with me. That has everything to do with that person and where they're at in their life, and that is okay. But I don't have to subject myself to being in environments that are not meant for me, or create this uneasiness inside of me, that create this anxiety, that create this disturbance of feelings that I've learned to pay attention to. So use this episode as a meaning to take pause. And when you take that pause, use it for intention of, when you're in that stillness, what are you doing? What are you doing with the emotions? And don't run from them. Running from your emotions will ultimately make it where it will pour out and project onto other people. And people, I need to tell you, people, when they say energy is real, energy is real. Energy is very real. I need to get a new mic stand, because this microphone is having a mind of its own. But energy is real. Energy is so real. And I say that because humans have this innate feeling, and we are energy. I mean, we've had this in biology, chemistry classes, about what energy is, and energy is felt. And so when you're around good energy, you're going to feel that. Biologically, you're going to feel that. So put yourself in spaces that allow you to feel the energy, where you don't feel like you're being drained. That someone is conscious enough about who they are that they can be conscious enough for you. And as long as you pour into you and you start gaining a certain level of consciousness and elevating your consciousness about your self-awareness. And what I mean by self-consciousness is a level of self-awareness, because there are multiple levels of awareness that we really don't talk about. And we could maybe talk about that in another episode. But there are certain levels of awareness that, we don't really think about. And so I just want people to understand, the awareness you have for yourself is the awareness that you will recognize in others. And make sure that as you are circling and auditing yourself, that you're auditing your environment. You're auditing your work environment. You're auditing the coworkers that you have around you. You are auditing the management that you have around you. You are auditing the music that you listen to. You're auditing your family. You're auditing you. Audit and take that serious. When people say they leave managers, they don't leave companies, because you're auditing your environment. You are auditing emotional behaviors that someone has, and if they can receive you or not. And I'm going to let you know, when people are stressed out, you feel it. You feel it every time. If someone is projecting how they feel onto you, recognize that, know that, and feel comfortable enough to speak up for yourself when you feel a certain type of way. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to yourself. So take pause. Survival mode, hey, still recovering. I'm not healed. I'm still healing. But take this as an opportunity to really learn what that looks like. And if that means sitting in stillness for you, I think that's where you're mostly going to get your answers, is in that stillness. And start going back to that kid. Start going back to that family of origin. Start going back to the type of people you have around you. And recognize. And if you don't have if you've really disassociated, I mean, I'm not a therapist or anything by any means. But I did study, neuroscience while I was in college, and communications, and did want to go to the psychology route. So there's a little bit in there. There's just a curiosity that's inside of me that, has always had a love for the sciences and behavioral sciences as well. And, I really have, found it in myself to help others as I've taken the lessons that I've learned, and pouring them into myself. And so, just take pause. Take pause and be intentional about having pause in your life. Be intentional about having pause in your day to day. because when you don't, it does add up. It does add up, and there is peace in solitude. And I have come to realize that because I have not been used to being by myself. I haven't been by myself actually ever. I had a kid at 18, so I've always had to think about someone else constantly and had very little time to think about myself. And and I just needed to figure out a way to make it. And so that oftentimes will flare up for me in like the grind and the hustle. And it's good to have, don't get me wrong, but in an excessive amount where you don't give back to yourself, you do create that burnout. And if you haven't created or curated a group of people that you can have as a support system, and keep in mind, your support system is a reflection of who you are. So if you have not been pouring into yourself and giving yourself the things you need, your support system may also need auditing as well. So the more you give to you, the more you'll get back, and the more you can make sure that also the support system you have around you is the right type of support system. Because if people are living their lives in a way that, is not conducive for the route that you're trying to take, then you may be getting solicited or unsolicited advice from people who ultimately are just a mirroring image of the traumas that you have yourself. So be intentional and love yourself, and make sure when you do that that you create those environments, and create those environments in the workplace. And unfortunately, in the workplace we don't have much control over the environments we have, but when you are looking for a job, or you are looking for a team to be on, or you are looking for a manager, think about who that person is. Even in your interviews, think about who that person is and how they're showing up for themselves. Think about interview questions when they say interview your manager. Interview your manager for emotional intelligence, because you're going to be dealing with them on the everyday. And when you log off and you shut that computer down, make sure you feel good about knowing that you have some form of connection with your manager. I have, like, seriously, the last 2 years have had the best managers I've ever had in my entire career. And because of them, they have allowed me to grow and show up in the way that I feel comfortable showing up in my authentic self. And I've poured more into myself and made a commitment to myself that I will always be intentional about making sure I have the right type of management around me. And if I don't, I will make sure I curate and find that, because I will not subject myself to being treated like shit. I don't care if you're a manager or not, your hierarchy, the level of, if you're the CEO of a company, a shitty person is a shitty person. And oftentimes, there's a lot of fakeness in it, just to make sure that, the environment that you're working on or being in, or working in, is tolerable, is palatable to digest and swallow that pill, and just enough to be able to shut the laptop down and be like, whew. But I can't commit my life to that. I can't commit my life to being in an environment that I know I have to spend a lot of my days on this earth in to survive. So be intentional. Take ownership. Be intentional. And if you can't be intentional in this moment, start being intentional by creating that networking. Find your people. You'll find out more as you pour into yourself who your people are, even in the networking opportunities. And be intentional. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. So until next time, that was my rant of the day. And I'm hoping that it helps someone. And I'm hoping that it did something for someone today. So until next time, stay courageous, y'all. I love y'all.